Either give Cody the credit card or get out of my house. My daughter's voice was ice, and my son-in-law stood by silently, as if he'd rehearsed for this very humiliation. The coffee cup tipped, scalding liquid splashing across my thigh, while they both just stood there, arms crossed, watching me as if I were a piece of trash. In that moment, I knew I wasn't a father anymore. I was just a burden they were casting aside. But my silence wasn't surrender. It was a silent vow, and they would soon learn. The contempt they showed their own father would come at a price steeper than they could ever imagine. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. Either give Cody the credit card or get out of my house. What do you think this is? A free nursing home? The words from Jess, my daughter, shattered the morning's fragile silence. They hung in the air, thick with the smell of coffee and the lavender air freshener I'd always hated. Almost instantly, as if the words themselves were a physical force, the white ceramic mug on the table tilted. Time seemed to crawl to a stop. I watched the dark arc of coffee sail through the air in perfect, slow motion before it struck. An initial warmth gave way to a searing, horrific pain as the boiling liquid hit my thigh, soaking through the thin fabric of my slacks and scalding my skin. A sharp crack echoed in the room as the mug shattered on the polished tile floor, white shards scattering like broken teeth. Jess stood there on the other side of the breakfast table, her arms crossed over her chest. Her face was a cold mask, devoid of remorse, not even a flinch. Her voice was flat, practiced, as if she were reciting an office policy, not evicting her own father. For the past 6 months, ever since my hip replacement surgery, the mornings in Jess's house had begun with a manufactured silence. It wasn't peace, but the suffocating weight of things left unsaid, hanging in that lavender-scented air I despised. I would sit at the kitchen table, sipping the weak coffee she brewed, feeling her care slowly twist into a web of control. I'd come here 6 months ago, naively grateful. "You can't be on your own, Dad," Jess had insisted, her voice dripping with concern. "Let me and Brian take care of you. We have plenty of room." I had agreed, thinking it was what Mary, my late wife, would have wanted. But that kindness came with strings attached. Care slowly morphed into control. "Don't you worry about the mail, Dad," Jess had said one day, sweeping up a pile of my letters. "I'll handle the bills online." And just like that, my financial world vanished behind a password-protected screen. "Your old friends keep calling and bothering you," she'd say another time. "You need your rest." And so, the threads connecting me to my past, to my brothers at the firehouse, were snipped, one by one. My world had shrunk to the size of these 4 walls. This morning, that silence broke. "Dad," Jess began as soon as I sat down, her voice dangerously sweet as she placed a stack of mail on the table. "Brian and I need to talk to you." I nodded, waiting. Brian, her husband, hovered nearby, pretending to look at his phone, but I knew he was listening, a silent ally in this ambush. "It's about Cody," Jess continued. "He's really gifted with computers. All his friends are streaming and making money. He needs a new rig to be competitive. It's only about $6,000. She said the number so casually, as if she were talking about the price of milk. I set my coffee down carefully. I knew my answer would ignite a fight she was already prepared for. "Cody needs a summer job, Jess," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "He needs to learn the value of $1. And that's when the mask fell. The smile vanished from Jess's face. "Value? You want to lecture me about money?" "It's not a lecture. It's the truth." "I'm not giving him my card, Jess," I said quietly. My voice was steady, but each word was a scratch in my throat. Jess turned to face me fully, her arms crossed, a sneer on her face that I didn't recognize on the daughter I had raised. "You're lucky we even let you stay here after your surgery," she said, her voice sharp as a shard of glass. You couldn't even walk without my help. Do you remember how I handled everything for you? The bills, the meds, the groceries? I drove you to physical therapy 3 times a week. What do you think this is? A free nursing home? And now you want to lecture me about money? Her words were sharp, quick, rehearsed, as if she'd been waiting for this confrontation. I let them fall. Every word landed like a kick to my chest, knocking the last bit of respect out of the air between us. I didn't argue. I knew it was pointless. My silence only seemed to infuriate her more. She stepped forward and took my coffee mug, the one she'd just made for me minutes before. She placed it deliberately on the edge of the table, right next to my leg, her eyes cold and determined. Then, as a final punctuating gesture to her speech, she nudged the table. The scalding coffee hit me. The searing pain made me gasp, but I didn't cry out. The mug crashed to the floor, shattering. White shards scattered like broken teeth. "You either give me the card," Jess said, leaning against the counter like a judge delivering a sentence, her voice flat and empty of emotion, "or you're out of here by the end of the day. Your choice." The burn on my thigh throbbed, but a chill colder than the burn was spreading from my heart. In 30 years as a firefighter, I'd faced unimaginable physical pain. I'd had burning beams fall on me, pulled people from wreckage. I knew pain, but this was different. It was a pain that went bone deep, the kind that comes only from betrayal. The daughter I'd stayed up with all night when she was sick now looked at me like an obstacle, a broken ATM. In that moment, I wasn't her father. I was a scalded, discarded burden. But what she mistook for submission was something else entirely. Because in that silence, a vow took shape. This was a debt that wouldn't be paid with money. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed myself up from the chair. The pain from my hip and the burn made every movement an effort, but I straightened my back and looked my daughter in the eye. "I'll be gone before sunset," I said, my voice as even as hers. Jess's sneer faltered for half a second. She expected me to beg. She expected guilt. She expected me to break. Instead, I gave her a silent promise. And promises, unlike credit cards, can't be canceled. I turned and walked away. The hallway seemed longer than usual. Every family photo on the wall seemed to watch me with silent judgment. There was Jess at 6, grinning with a missing tooth. There was Mary, my wife, her smile radiant. God, Mary, if you were here, you'd know what to do. I went into my temporary bedroom. The old suitcase was in the corner of the closet, coated in a thin layer of dust. It was a relic from another life, a life where I was my own man. I pulled it down and began packing my few belongings. From the living room, I heard the TV click on, some reality show. Canned laughter echoed through the house. They had already erased me as easily as turning a page. I zipped the suitcase shut. The sound was final. When I walked out, Jess was on the sofa, her eyes glued to the screen. Brian was back, sitting beside her. They glanced at me and the suitcase, then looked away, as if I were a handyman who had just finished a job. I walked past them, my steps heavy but steady, and went straight out the front door without a backward glance. The door clicked shut behind me. I stood on the porch for a moment, my hand tight on the suitcase handle. The afternoon air was warm, and somewhere down the street, a lawnmower droned on. A perfectly normal world, oblivious to the fracture that had just occurred. I didn't belong here anymore. Driving with no destination, I felt hollow. I ended up at a motel off the highway, the kind with a flickering neon sign and paper-thin walls. The clerk didn't even look up as I paid cash for a room. To him, I was just another anonymous old man running from something. That first night alone was hell. The room smelled of bleach and loneliness. I sat on the edge of the bed, carefully applying some antibiotic ointment to the burn. It looked worse than I thought under the dim yellow light. But the physical pain was a small distraction from the storm inside me. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, listening to the rumble of trucks on the highway, and faced the undeniable truth. I had been erased by my own family. But as dawn broke, something shifted. The firefighter in me took over. When a fire has burned everything to the ground, you don't sit there mourning the ashes. You assess the damage, you secure the scene, and you start to clean up. You survive. I couldn't stay in the motel forever. I needed a base of operations. That morning, I used my phone to look up cheap apartment rentals. The simple acts of talking to landlords, of setting up appointments, they felt like the first gulps of air after being held underwater. And that's how I found myself here. The apartment I rented was on the third floor of an old brick building overlooking a narrow alley. Everything about it felt temporary. The faint smell of new paint couldn't quite cover the deeper scent of old damp. The furniture was sparse and cheap, with no personal touches. It wasn't a home. It was a shelter, a command post from which to survey the wreckage of my life. The first few days passed in a fog. I spent most of my time in the stiff armchair, staring out the window but not really seeing anything. My mind was stuck back in Jess's kitchen, replaying the moment the mug shattered, the sound of her words, the sharp pain in my hip every time I stood up, and the tender, healing burn on my thigh were physical reminders, but the deepest wound was invisible. It sat in my chest, a dense, heavy mass of disappointment and betrayal. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe Brian put her up to it. Maybe I had been too harsh. But every excuse dissolved against the cold, hard fact. My daughter had thrown hot coffee on me and kicked me out of her house. On the fourth day, as I was heating a can of soup on the old electric stove, I caught my reflection in the refrigerator door. A tired old man, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. That wasn't Thomas Hayes, the firefighter who ran into burning buildings. That was a victim. And in that instant, I knew I couldn't go on like this. My silence on leaving was dignity, but my silence now was surrender. I turned off the stove, leaving the soup. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Names flashed by, mostly old friends from the department, neighbors who had moved away. Then I stopped on one. Paul Kowalski. We'd been friends for over 40 years. Our kids grew up together. Our wives had been best friends. After Mary died, it was Paul and his wife who had pulled me from the fog of grief. After retiring from the fire department, Paul had gone to law school, opening a small practice specializing in wills and estates. He was level-headed, trustworthy, and brutally honest. I hadn't spoken to him in months, not since Jess had started managing my calls. My finger hovered over the call button. To tell your best friend that your daughter treated you like a parasite, that you'd been kicked out like a stray. The shame was a bitter pill to swallow. I felt my chest tighten. But that shame was nothing compared to the prospect of living out the rest of my life as a victim. I took a deep breath and pressed call. It rang 3 times, each ring a hammer against my hesitation. Kowalski Law, a familiar voice answered. Paul speaking? Paul, I said, surprised at the rasp in my own voice. It's Tom. There was a short pause on the other end. Then Paul's voice warmed, erasing my awkwardness. Tom, my God, it's been too long. How are you? Everything okay? Not exactly, Paul. Not okay at all. The cheer in his voice vanished instantly, replaced by the serious concern I'd heard on the scene of a dozen major fires. Where are you, Tom? What's happened? I told him. Not everything. Just the broad strokes. The surgery, staying with Jess, the argument. I left out the part about the coffee. It was too raw to put into words. I just said we'd had a major disagreement and I'd moved out. Paul listened in silence, never interrupting. His silence wasn't disinterest, it was focus, giving me the space to unload the burden. When I finished, He just sighed, a heavy sound over the phone. Jesus, Tom. I'm so sorry you're going through this. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Then he shifted into lawyer mode, his voice becoming sharp and clear. My specialty is wills, not financial fraud, but I'll get you started. First things first, we need paper. Do you have any bank statements? His question was like a light cutting through the fog. Statements. I hadn't seen a paper statement in months. No, I answered, a wave of shame washing over me. Jess moved everything online to make it easier. Said she'd take care of it. I could almost hear Paul wince through the phone. Okay, that's fine. That's where we start. Do you have a computer and do you remember your online banking password? I have an old laptop. The password? I think so. Good. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., I'm coming to your place. Don't go anywhere, just text me the address. We're going to go through this together. And Tom? Paul's voice became firm. Don't talk to Jess or Brian until you've talked to me. Understood? Understood, Paul. Thank you. Friends don't thank friends. See you in the morning. I hung up and felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders, only to be replaced by a different one. A cold, anxious dread. For the first time in days, I wasn't alone. But I had a sinking feeling that what we were about to find would be worse than anything I could imagine. Paul arrived on time the next morning. He brought a paper bag from our favorite bakery with hot coffee and croissants, a small gesture of normalcy in the middle of this mess. He looked around my small, dingy apartment, and I saw a flicker of anger in his eyes, not at me, but for me. All right, Tom, he said, setting his leather briefcase on the kitchen table, the only surface large enough. Let's get to work. I pulled the old laptop out of my suitcase. It was covered in a thin film of dust, and the hinges groaned like old bones as I opened it. It booted up slowly, the fan whirring like a tired sigh. For years, this machine had been for reading the news and sending the odd email. Now, it was the most important tool in my fight. Email first, Paul said, pulling up a chair. If she moved the statements online, the bank would have sent email notifications. I logged into my inbox. It was nearly empty. Just a few junk mail promotions. That's weird, I muttered. There should at least be a notice from the power company. Paul narrowed his eyes. Let me see. He pointed to the settings icon. Go into your filters and forwarding rules. I followed his instructions, and there it was. A rule created 6 months ago, right after I moved in with Jess. It was simple. Any email containing the keywords bank, statement, bill, financial, or payment was to be automatically forwarded to jessica.price.personal.email and then deleted from my inbox. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't help. This was a deliberate, calculated cover-up. Print this, Paul said instantly, his voice cold. No, screenshot it. Get the whole screen, with the date and time on your computer visible. This is a smoking gun. This is intent. Next was the bank. My heart hammered against my ribs as I typed in my password. The site took a moment to load, and then the numbers appeared. My savings account balance. It was much, much lower than I remembered. Check the transaction history, Paul said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might make the numbers worse. We started scrolling month by month. At first, it was small things. Subscription fees for streaming services I'd never heard of. Late-night food delivery orders. Then came the bigger charges. Hundreds of dollars at online clothing stores. I didn't buy any of this, I whispered. Jess said she used my card for groceries sometimes and would pay me back, but she never did, Paul finished, his eyes glued to the screen. And then we saw them. Cody's gaming charges. Not one, dozens. A slow drip of transactions, $20, $50, then $100, that added up to thousands of dollars. He had been using my pension, the money I had sweated and bled for over 30 years, to buy virtual items in a world that didn't exist. I leaned back in my chair, feeling sick. Each transaction line was a punch to the gut. I remembered all the times Jess had said Cody was learning to code or competing in online tournaments. It was all a lie. "Wait a minute," Paul said suddenly, pointing to a transaction from 4 months ago. "What's this, Tom?" "A huge deposit. Almost $100,000. I squinted at the screen. "I don't know. I don't have any money like that." "It says transfer from First National Mortgage." "Did you take out a mortgage?" "Number Mary and I paid off the house years ago." Paul was silent for a long moment. I could see his legal mind churning, connecting the dots. He scrolled down to the monthly automatic payments. There was a new one, for over $1,000 a month, also going to First National Mortgage. "Tom," Paul said, his voice dangerously low, "did you ever sign any papers to refinance your house?" "Refinance? No, of course not. Why would I?" Paul turned to look at me, and I saw the horrifying truth in his eyes before he even said it. "I think they did it for you." The room spun. The air grew thick, and I couldn't breathe. The thought was too monstrous, too cruel to comprehend. My house. The home Mary and I had built, where we raised Jess, the place that held all our memories. "They couldn't have," I stammered. "They'd need my signature." "Yes, they would," Paul said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "They would need your signature, and I'm willing to bet they got it." "It's not just pocket money, Paul," I said, my voice cracking. They forged my signature to refinance the entire house." Paul put a hand on my shoulder, a steadying gesture in the storm. "Easy, Tom. We're going to get through this. We're going to print every single one of these, every page, every transaction." We spent the rest of the afternoon printing. My old printer whirred and groaned, spitting out page after page of betrayal. The stack of paper grew higher and heavier on the table. When we were done, Paul pointed to the stack. "This is your ammunition, Tom. The numbers don't lie." But there was one more piece. "The mail," I said, suddenly remembering. Jess was getting all my paper mail. There must have been documents about the loan sent there. "You're right," Paul nodded, "and we need to stop that right now." We drove to the nearest post office. The scene was so normal. People waiting in line to ship packages, clerks stamping things with bored efficiency. Its mundanity was a bizarre contrast to the chaos in my heart. I went to the counter and explained the situation. The older woman behind the counter peered at me over her glasses. She typed my name and address into her computer. "Yes, sir," she said, not looking up. "There was a change of address request filed online for Thomas Hayes 3 months ago. All mail is being forwarded to a P.O. box in the suburbs." "I didn't file that request," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This time she looked up, and I saw a flicker of sympathy in her eyes. Maybe she'd seen stories like this before. "I understand, sir. You'll need to fill out this PS Form 3575 to cancel the forward and reclaim your address. Would you like to open a new P.O. box here to make sure your mail comes somewhere secure?" "Yes," I said immediately. "Please." Filling out the form, signing my name on the line marked Owner, was a small but deeply significant act. It was the first step in taking back control, in reclaiming my own identity. As we left the post office, the sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow on the buildings. I held the small, new key to my P.O. box and a copy of the complaint form in my hand. We had the evidence. We had a plan. The war was just beginning, and I knew it would be long and painful. But for the first time in days, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a firefighter heading into a blaze, and I wasn't backing down until it was out. That night, after Paul left, I didn't sleep. The apartment was silent, but my mind was a roaring storm. The stack of papers we'd printed sat on the kitchen table like an indictment, every number a fresh stab at my trust. I sat there in the dark, staring at it. The betrayal was no longer a vague feeling. It had dates and times and decimal points. It was the $19.99 charge for a streaming service on the very night Jess told me she was too busy to stop by. It was the $500 cash withdrawal from an ATM near the casino on a weekend Brian said he was away on business. The initial anger, hot and wild like a flashover, slowly cooled, leaving something colder, harder. Resolve. I had spent my life putting out fires. I knew that running in blind only gets you burned. You have to assess the situation, find the source, and most importantly, you have to create a line of containment, a fire break, to stop the spread before you can extinguish it completely. For the next few days, Paul and I turned my little apartment into a war room. We spread the statements out on the floor, using highlighters to mark the suspicious transactions. Paul, with the patience of a friend and the meticulousness of a lawyer, had me organize everything chronologically, creating an undeniable narrative of financial abuse. "We're not just showing them what happened, Tom," he said, tapping a stack of papers. "We have to show them how it happened, systematically." The work was tedious and painful. Every page I turned was a tainted memory. But it was also purposeful. Instead of drowning in the pain, I was turning it into evidence. Late that week, Paul called again. "I've got an appointment for you," he said. "Next Tuesday, 2 p.m., with a woman named Brenda Walsh. She's with the county's Adult Protective Services Unit. Bring everything we've got." The week-long wait was an eternity. I tried to keep busy. I took long walks in the nearby park, the ache in my hip a constant reminder of why I'd ended up in this mess in the first place. I cooked simple meals, trying to find normalcy in small routines. But my mind was never quiet. There were moments, late at night, when I'd pick up my phone, my thumb hovering over Jess's name. A part of me still wanted to scream at her, to ask, why? But Paul's voice would echo in my head. Don't talk to them. Silence was discipline. Silence was strategy. The day of the appointment finally arrived. The county services building was a massive, impersonal concrete structure. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and disinfectant. Long hallways were lit by cold, fluorescent lights. I felt small and out of place, just another number in a vast bureaucratic system. We were shown into a small office. Brenda Walsh was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that were tired but sharp. She did not look like a savior. She looked like a professional, a civil servant who had seen too many sad stories. She shook our hands, her grip firm. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Kowalski, thanks for coming in. Please, tell me how I can help." Paul began, his voice even and objective, laying out our evidence on her desk. The screenshot of the email forwarding rule, the marked-up statements, the post office complaint form. Brenda listened without interruption, her eyes scanning each document quickly. She showed no shock, no surprise. Her calm was somehow more unsettling than outrage would have been. It told me that my story, as horrific as it was to me, was not unique. When Paul finished, she looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. "Mr. Hayes," she asked gently, "does your daughter have any legal power of attorney for you?" "No," I said firmly. "She mentioned it a few times, said it would be easier for medical things, but I never signed anything." I remembered Mary's advice. Never sign anything you don't understand, Tom. Her words, even after all these years, were still protecting me. Brenda nodded, making a note. "And you had no knowledge of this mortgage refinance before you discovered it on the statement?" "None whatsoever." She leaned back in her chair, looking at the stack of papers. She was quiet for what felt like the longest minute of my life. Then she looked directly at me, and I saw a steady resolve in her eyes. "Mr. Hayes, this is a clear-cut case of financial elder abuse," she said, and the words were a lifeline. It was validation from an outsider, an expert, that I wasn't imagining things, that my pain was real. This evidence is very strong. The email forwarding and mail diversion in particular. They show a systematic intent to conceal. She continued, I am opening an official case file immediately. This will provide a legal basis and put pressure on the financial institutions. When you dispute the fraudulent transactions with the bank, having an active Adult Protective Services case number will make them take it far more seriously. Here is your case number. Keep it safe. She handed me a business card with the number written on it. If your daughter or son-in-law contacts you or pressures you in any way, you call me immediately, she added. You are not alone in this anymore. Leaving that building, I felt a profound sense of relief. A part of the burden had been shared. We had officially fired the first shot, not with a confrontation, but with a stamped and filed case number. But Paul knew this was only the beginning. The case file will help us fight the charges, he said as we walked to the parking lot. But it doesn't protect your biggest asset, the house. They did it once. They could try again. We need to build a real firebreak. What do you mean? I mean we need to legally put the house out of their reach, he explained. I know someone. Elena Park. She's the best trust and estate planning lawyer in the city. She's not cheap, but she's a surgeon. Precise, efficient, and she doesn't leave scars. It took another week to get an appointment with Elena Park. Her office was the polar opposite of Brenda's. It was on the top floor of a modern glass building with minimalist furniture and a panoramic view of the city. Everything about it screamed expensive and powerful. Elena Park was an elegantly dressed Asian woman with a sharp haircut and a firm handshake. She wasted no time on pleasantries. Mr. Hayes, Paul has given me the summary, she said as we sat at a polished wood conference table. Let me see the documents. I laid out the stack of evidence again. Elena reviewed it with a quick but thorough efficiency. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the numbers and dates like a machine. When she was done, she set the papers down and steepled her fingers. They were reckless, she observed, her voice devoid of emotion. Forging a signature on a mortgage application is a felony, but a criminal prosecution will take time. Our first priority is to protect your assets so this can never happen again. She pulled a blank legal pad toward her. We are going to establish an irrevocable trust. Think of it as a legal safe. You will place your house inside this safe. Once it's in there, you still have the full right to live in it and benefit from it, but legally, you are no longer the direct owner. The trust is. So who controls it? I asked. We will appoint a trustee. This person will be the only one with the authority to sign any documents related to that property. It needs to be someone you trust implicitly, someone who cannot be influenced or coerced by your daughter. Paul, I believe you would be a good choice. Paul nodded. I'm willing, if Tom agrees. I looked at my friend, who had stood by me without a moment's hesitation. I can't think of anyone better. Elena smiled for the first time, a small professional curve of her lips. Good. Then, once the house is transferred into the trust with Paul as the trustee, any attempt by your daughter to sell, refinance, or borrow against it will hit a brick wall. The bank can't proceed without the trustee's signature. We are, in essence, locking the door and giving Paul the key. She explained the process with clean, concise language. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the documents. Signing those papers was a strange feeling. I was giving up direct ownership of the home I had worked my whole life for, but it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like an act of protection. I wasn't building a cage. I was building a fortress. When it was all done, Elena gave us copies. I will file this deed transfer with the county recorder's office first thing in the morning, she announced. It should be officially recorded within 1 to 3 business days. As of that moment, your wall is officially up. In all those weeks, I hadn't received a single call or text from Jess or Brian. Their silence was eerie. It told me they hadn't yet discovered that I'd slipped from their control. They were still living under the illusion that they held all the cards, that the old man was just sulking somewhere and would soon come crawling back. They had no idea that the old man was busy building a firebreak, a wall made of legal paper, reinforced with irrefutable evidence, and built on the foundation of a 40-year friendship. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They didn't realize they were the ones who were about to be contained. The weeks after establishing the trust passed in a strange quiet. My legal firebreak was in place, but I didn't know when the flames would reach it. I lived in a state of waiting, a feeling familiar to any firefighter. The tense stillness before the alarm bell rings. I spent my time organizing my small apartment, trying to make the temporary shelter feel something like a home. But whenever I closed my eyes, I saw Jess's face, cold and distant. Their move came on a bright, windy Tuesday afternoon. My phone rang. It was an old neighbor, Bill, who still lived across the street from my house. "Tom," he said, his voice hesitant. "I don't mean to bother you, but there's a strange fellow walking around your yard with a tablet. Looks like he's taking pictures. Just thought you should know." My heart gave a single, hard thump. They were making their move. "Thanks, Bill, I'm on it." I immediately called Paul. He wasn't surprised. "They're getting the house appraised," he said, his voice calm. "Probably to sell it or use it as collateral for another loan. They still think they have the right. It's time to show them the wall they're about to hit." Our plan for this exact scenario was already in place. Paul had looped in another old friend from the firehouse, Frank, who'd gone into real estate after retiring. Frank had a good eye and zero patience for liars. He had arranged for a professional appraiser, a woman named Carla Meeks, whom he trusted implicitly. "Get over there," Paul said over the phone. "But stay out of sight. Sit in your car. Let Frank and Carla handle it. You just need to be there as the owner, a silent presence." 40 minutes later, I was parked across the street, a block down from my own house. My house. Seeing it from a distance made my gut twist. The lawn was still mowed, the flower pots Mary had planted still blooming on the porch. It looked so peaceful, a deceptive calm hiding the rot within. A white sedan was parked in the driveway, and a man in a polo shirt with a tablet was walking around with the entitled air of someone who believed he belonged there. A moment later, Frank's truck pulled up and parked right behind me. Frank got out, his shoulders broad and his gait steady. Carla Meeks emerged from the passenger side. She was a woman in her 40s with her hair in a tight bun and a calm, professional face. They didn't look at me, just gave a slight nod and crossed the street together. I rolled my window down just enough to hear. "Excuse me, can I help you?" the other man asked, slightly annoyed at being interrupted. "Hello?" Carla said, her voice polite but firm. "I'm Carla Meeks, a licensed property appraiser. We're here at the request of the owner, Mr. Thomas Hayes, to conduct an appraisal." The man's smile faltered. "Oh, there must be some mistake. I'm here for an appraisal as well, requested by the Price family, who are managing the property." "The Price family has no authority to request an appraisal," Frank cut in, his voice a low rumble like a church bell. "They are not the owners." "Look," the man said, getting flustered. "I've got a work order right here. I just need to get inside and—" Carla cut him off, her tone still perfectly professional. "The current owner has not requested your services. Furthermore, this property is now held by the Hayes Family Trust. All inquiries must be directed to the trust's attorney, Ms. Elena Park." She held out a business card. The man stared at the card, then at Carla, then at Frank. His confidence evaporated, replaced by confusion and suspicion. He muttered something about having to check with the office, then hurried back to his car and drove away. Frank and Carla stood there for a moment, making sure he was gone. Carla took a few pictures of the house from the exterior for her own records. Then they walked back. Frank tapped on my window. When I rolled it down, he just winked. "The wall held, Tom." It was a small victory, but it gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in months. I hadn't had to say a word. The legal wall we had built had spoken for itself. That victory gave me the courage for the next step. It was time to stop defending and start attacking. The next day, Paul took me to see Denise Cho. If Paul was the trusted family doctor and Elena Park was the precise surgeon, Denise Cho was a heavyweight boxer. She was a litigator, a courtroom warrior. Her office had no city view, just walls lined with legal binders and framed degrees. Denise was a powerful woman with a bone-crushing handshake and a gaze that seemed to see right through you. She had already reviewed the entire file Paul had sent. "Mr. Hayes," she said, wasting no time. "Your case is strong. The paper trail doesn't lie. We have the email forwarding, the mail diversion, the unauthorized transactions. We can get a handwriting expert to look at the refinance documents. This is a clear-cut civil suit for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." She paused, looking me straight in the eye. "But you need to understand this. When we file, they're not going to sit back. They will fight back. They will try to discredit you. They'll say you're old, confused, vindictive. They will drag your daughter, your grandson into it. It will get ugly and personal. Are you ready for that?" I thought of the burn on my thigh. I thought of the contempt in Jess's eyes. I thought of my home, which held the ghost of my wife. "I'm ready," I said, my voice firm. And so, we went to war. Denise Cho drafted a detailed lawsuit, cataloging every one of Jess and Brian Price's transgressions. A week later, they were served. Their response came faster than I expected. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in my P.O. box. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, representing Mr. and Mrs. Brian and Jessica Price. I opened it with slightly trembling hands. The contents were worse than anything Denise had warned me about. It was a formal answer to my lawsuit. In it, their lawyer not only denied every allegation, but filed a countersuit. They claimed that I, Thomas Hayes, due to my age and diminished cognitive capacity following my surgery, had become paranoid and hostile. They alleged that I had been the one spending money irresponsibly and was now trying to blame my devoted caregivers. The final paragraph was a punch to the gut. They were petitioning the court to order a psychiatric evaluation of me, with the ultimate goal of obtaining a conservatorship over my person and my estate. I had to read that part 3 times. My daughter. The child I had raised was formally asking a court to declare me mentally incompetent. The rage I felt was terrifying, a white-hot flash that blotted out all other thought. But beneath the rage was a profound, deep ache, a pain worse than the day I was kicked out. Being called a burden was one thing. Being called insane was a complete annihilation of my personhood. The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks later. It was the longest 6 weeks of my life. Denise and her team worked tirelessly, gathering more evidence, including a preliminary report from a handwriting expert who concluded the signature on the mortgage documents was highly likely a forgery. Finally, the day came. I wore my oldest suit, the one I'd worn to Mary's funeral. I wanted to feel her with me. The courthouse was a cold, solemn place. The smell of wood polish and old paper filled the air. I sat next to Denise, trying to keep my breathing even. Then they walked in. Jess and Brian, with their lawyer. Jess looked thin and pale. She wouldn't look at me. Brian, on the other hand, stared at me with a look of brazen defiance. When the judge entered, the courtroom rose. The hearing began. Their lawyer went first, repeating the lies from their letter, trying to paint a picture of a forgetful, bitter old man. Then it was Denise's turn. She rose, a small woman who radiated an iron confidence. She never raised her voice. She simply presented the facts, methodically and irrefutably. "Your Honor," she began, "the defendants would have you believe this is a family tragedy, a sad misunderstanding brought on by old age. But this is not a story about feelings, Your Honor. This is a story about numbers and actions. She laid out the evidence like a surgeon dissecting a tumor. The printout of the email forwarding rule, the U.S. Postal Service record of mail diversion, the dozens of pages of bank statements with highlighted expenditures, and finally, the handwriting expert's report. These are not the actions of devoted caregivers, Your Honor, Denise concluded. This was a calculated plan to financially exploit and to conceal that exploitation. They took advantage of their father's trust and his vulnerable state after surgery to commit fraud. The judge, an older man with a stern face, reviewed the documents in silence. He glanced at Jess and Brian's lawyer, who was shuffling papers nervously. Then he looked at me. His gaze wasn't pitying, just focused and assessing. Finally, he looked up, straight ahead, and picked up his gavel. "The evidence of fraudulent activity is overwhelming," he said, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "The court finds in preliminary favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Hayes. Any liability from this illegally obtained mortgage refinance is hereby nullified in his regard." He paused, looking directly at Jess and Brian. "The defendant's petition for a psychiatric evaluation is denied. Furthermore, the court will be forwarding a copy of this file to the district attorney's office for a possible criminal investigation." Bang! The sound of the gavel was final, absolute. I heard Jess let out a sharp, choked gasp. Brian went rigid, his face pale with rage and defeat. I felt no joy, not a single ounce of triumph, just a heavy, weary relief. The battle was won, but the cost was the complete and utter destruction of my family. As I walked out of the courtroom with Denise, I didn't look back. I didn't want to see my daughter's face. The counteroffensive was over. Now came the fallout. Victory in a courtroom doesn't feel like it does in the movies. There was no cheering, no celebratory hugs. As Denise Cho and I walked out of the building under a gray sky, all I felt was a profound, heavy emptiness. The legal battle was over, but the war in my soul was not. I had won, but I had lost my family. The first few days after the ruling passed in an almost complete silence. My small apartment became an island. I had cut the chains Jess and Brian had wrapped around me, but now I was adrift, alone. Their silence, after all the venom, was its own form of torture. No calls, no texts. It was as if I had been erased all over again, this time by their own failure and shame. News travels the way it does in small towns, not through headlines, but through whispers. Bill, my old neighbor, called, his voice full of awkward sympathy. "Tom, I saw them moving things out. There's a for sale by bank sign on the lawn now. I'm sorry." I thanked him for letting me know and hung up, feeling no joy. That house, filled with my memories of Mary, was now a public monument to my daughter's downfall. Paul called too. He'd heard that Brian's business partners were pulling out. The Price name was now associated with fraud and untrustworthiness. They had burned all their own bridges. I listened, but the news brought me no satisfaction. The ashes of their life just made the air thicker. My life settled into a monotonous rhythm. A walk in the morning, a book in the afternoon, the news at night. I had my independence back, but it was a lonely independence. The burn on my thigh had healed into a dark pink scar, a permanent reminder. I wondered if the scar on my heart would ever fade. Then, on a rainy Thursday evening about 3 weeks after the hearing, there was a knock on my door. It wasn't a confident knock, but a timid, almost hesitant one. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peered through the peephole. A small, rain-soaked figure was standing under the dim hallway light. It was Cody. I swung the door open. He stood there, his oversized hoodie dripping, his hair matted to his forehead. He had a single backpack with him, and his eyes were red and swollen. He looked younger than his 16 years, a kid lost in an adult storm. "Grandpa," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Come in, son. I said, stepping back to let him pass. You're soaked. He shuffled inside, dropping the wet backpack on the floor. He didn't say anything, just stood there, shivering from the cold and from something else. I got him a clean towel. Dry off. I'll make you some hot tea. In the kitchen, as the kettle heated, I could hear quiet, choked sobs from the living room. I made the tea, adding a spoonful of honey, and brought it out to him. Cody was huddled in my armchair, the towel wrapped around his shoulders. He took the mug in both hands, letting the warmth seep into them. We sat in silence for a long time. I didn't push. I knew he would talk when he was ready. Finally, his voice came out, broken. They've been fighting all the time, Grandpa. Mom just cries and Dad just yells. He says it's all her fault for not being able to control you. She says it was his idea in the first place. He took a shuddering breath. Tonight he left, just packed a bag and said he couldn't take it anymore. My heart ached. As much as Brian was a scoundrel to Cody, he was still the man who had been his stepfather for years. Mom just sat there, Cody continued, staring into his mug. She didn't say anything. I asked her what we were going to do, and she said, you ruined everything. He looked up at me then, and in his watery eyes, I saw a deep confusion. Grandpa, she said you ruined everything, but I saw the court papers. She hid them in her closet, but I read them. It said they were the ones who did wrong. I don't understand. Why would she lie? His innocent question was like a knife twisting in an old wound. How could I answer that? How could I explain the complexities of shame and broken pride to a 16-year-old boy? I sighed, setting my own mug down. Cody, I began slowly. Sometimes when people do wrong things and they feel ashamed, it's easier to find someone else to blame. It's easier to point a finger than it is to look at yourself. Your mom, she's in a lot of pain and she's confused. She's not lying to hurt you. She's lying to herself. But it's true, right? He asked, his voice filled with a fragile hope. You're not the bad guy, are you? I reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. I'm not perfect, Cody, but I didn't do what they said. I was just protecting what was mine. Sometimes doing the right thing is the hardest thing of all. Cody nodded, a tear finally tracing a path down his cheek. Can I stay here tonight? Of course, son, I said, my voice softening. You can stay as long as you need. That night, Cody slept on my living room sofa, curled up in an old blanket I'd kept from when Jess was a little girl. Watching him sleep, a warm sense of responsibility settled over me. I had lost my daughter, at least for now. But maybe, just maybe, I could still save my grandson. In the weeks that followed, a new rhythm began. Cody all but moved in. He went to school from my apartment. In the evenings, we'd cook dinner together, watch TV, or sometimes just sit in comfortable silence reading. His presence chased the loneliness from the apartment, turning my shelter into a home. Jess would call occasionally, just to ask if Cody was okay. Her voice on the phone was always hesitant and distant. We never spoke about what happened. Then, one afternoon in late fall, weeks after Cody's arrival, there was another knock. This time, when I opened the door, it was Jess. She looked different. The defiant confidence was gone. The perfect makeup was gone. She wore old jeans and a frayed sweater. Her hair was pulled back simply. She looked tired and thin, and for the first time in years, she looked vulnerable. She wouldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at her shoes. Can I come in, Dad? I was silent for a moment, then stepped back, holding the door open. She walked hesitantly into the living room where Cody was doing his homework. He looked up, surprised. Mom, he said. Hi, honey, Jess whispered. The air in the room was thick with tension. I stood there, not knowing what to say or do. The confrontation I had braced myself for never came. In its place was just a heavy, awkward silence. Finally, Jess turned to me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and when she looked up, I saw they were filled with tears. "Dad," she started, her voice breaking into a whisper. I was wrong. I don't even know how to begin to fix it. The words I'd once longed to hear brought no sense of victory, only a profound sadness for all that we had lost. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, my little girl, now a broken woman. I saw real remorse in her eyes, not regret for being caught, but true pain for what she had done. "You can start by sitting down, Jess," I said softly. That night, for the first time in almost a year, the three of us sat together. Not many words were spoken, but it was a start. Time passed. Winter arrived, bringing cold and the first snow. Cody still lived with me, but he started spending weekends with his mom. Jess got a part-time job and rented a small apartment. She was trying to rebuild her life, one piece at a time. Our relationship was still fragile, full of awkward silences, but the bitterness was gone. One evening, as Cody and I were making chili, his favorite, he asked me a question out of the blue. "Grandpa, later on, if Mom messes up again, will you still forgive her?" I stopped stirring the pot, thinking carefully. I looked at my grandson's young face, already etched with worry, and I knew my answer mattered. I set the spoon down and turned to him. "Love doesn't mean surrender, Cody," I said. "It means knowing when to stand your ground and when to open the door again, even just a crack. Your father," I continued, "taught me that standing up to contempt is the only way to keep your dignity. But your mother, she's teaching me that sometimes the door doesn't have to stay locked forever." Cody nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "I get it." Later that night, after Cody was asleep, I sat alone in the quiet living room. Streetlights cast long shadows on the floor. I thought about the journey I had been on, from the coffee burn to the courtroom. I hadn't gotten my old life back. The house Mary and I had shared was gone. A part of my family was broken beyond repair. But as I looked around this small apartment, now filled with the sound of my grandson's laughter, a place where my daughter could knock on the door without hostility, I realized I hadn't lost everything. I had lost an illusion and found a truth. The truth that dignity isn't something you give away. It's something you defend. And that sometimes, in the ashes of what you've lost, something new, however fragile, can begin to grow. The future was still unknown, but for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. If you found this story compelling, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear our next story, click on the box on the left of your screen. Thank you for watching.